Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast with Angie Manson, round two. We did the last edition last year talking about her business, talking about addiction and recovery. So we're going to continue on that role today. I'm glad to have Angie on because she's a great guest, has a trove of experience, and is really talkable. This pod is brought to you by podpar.com. If you want to start your own podcast and scale, monetize the unconventional way, you can go to podpar.com. It's my podcasting agency. Angie, welcome to the pod. Glad to have you on. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays?
Thank you. Thanks for having me on again. Oh, a little bit about myself. Well, I ended up in running a drug rehab because I struggled with my own addiction almost 30 years ago. And I was given the opportunity by the judge to go to rehab instead of prison. And I took advantage of that and I never left. So back then it was a very small little operation in the executive director's house. And from that point, me with him, we started to grow it. Ultimately, he turned it over to me, and then I've helped grow it ever since. So now that's pretty much what I do. I also have a podcast, and yeah, what else do you need?
What's been new this year? Like, what have you been focusing your time
Well, I know for myself, I've really been delving even more into personal development. There's been a path I've been on in the last year of re-experiencing like spirituality, utilizing different techniques between meditation, breathing, somatic therapy, equine therapy. There's been a ton of things that I've been sort of doing personally because I am a firm believer that, nothing ever stays the same. So if you're not actively working on yourself, in all these different areas, then you're going to be going down. So I've been out in a big pursuit for continued personal enhancement and development, and then taking what I'm learning and thinking about like an elevate 3.0, what other things I can bring into the program that I know would only benefit our clients and staff.
So, okay, what's been new in the Elevate centers that you've opened? Like, what new programs are you putting forward? What new challenges have been happening this year?
Probably our biggest challenges are continuing to generate enough clients that can come to the program. Obviously, there's not a need for people to help. Like addiction is huge, and we've had the most tremendous surge in alcohol. Like our demographic is like 70% people struggling with alcohol now. So it's not a matter of a shortage of people to help, but it's getting everything lined up so that we can help them. And so it's insurance, it's private pay, it's finding people that have the means to take 30 days off, 60 days off, plus have the money, plus have the insurance. So that's the continued, I think our toughest thing to combat is to get enough people continuously in to be able to help. So that's pretty much what we work on nonstop. Of course, also, we don't build our business on return customers or lifetime customers. So it's a consistent generation of basically new customers or new people to help.
Let's talk about the fentanyl problem. Reading here on your LinkedIn that 127 soldiers died between 2015 and 2022 in the streets. People die by the hundreds almost on a daily basis, depending
Yes.
the time of the year. So how can we eradicate that problem?
We got to stop the flow of it coming in. I mean, it's flooded our country like it used to be heroin, right? And so it would be imported, but you needed poppy plants. It was much more difficult to attain. But with fentanyl, it's so cheap and easy to make, and it comes through the borders and it's everywhere. The best thing we could do is try to educate people, because I think a lot of people are under the opinion, oh, it's just cocaine or it's just weed or it's just, Molly, whatever it is. They don't realize that that's all being laced now with fentanyl. So people don't know they're being poisoned by this chemical. They think they're just doing recreational drugs. So I think the first thing that has to happen is education. I know they're putting a lot of emphasis on, no, just more Narcan. Let's get, more means of resuscitating somebody if they OD, which is nice, but that's kind of like after the fact. Like, I think we really need to focus, instead of all that money on, supplying Narcan everywhere, let's utilize that to help get people effective treatment so that they're no longer a threat to themselves.
Right. And I guess legalization wouldn't hurt, right? What is your stance on legalization of drugs like heroin?
I don't think it would help. I think that it would still kill people. It's not like you legalize it and then suddenly people aren't dying from it. Weed I get, or marijuana, I would even hope nowadays that people get it from the dispensaries, just because you can't trust anything that you find on the streets. So for those reasons, for like safety reasons, I am a fan of like legalization of marijuana, possibly mushrooms, things that are not going to kill somebody. But I think the legalization of drugs that could take somebody out, I don't think that's going to solve anything.
Right, because my understanding was that fentanyl was part of the mix that they gave people in the street. So, and it is that way because it is cheap, right? Or is it because it's a substance on its own and people are like, I want fentanyl today?
Both. So we have people in for both. It is cheap. It's easy to produce. Like I said, a lot of people are taking it. They don't even know they're taking it. Like we do drug tests, drug panels when everybody enters the program, so that we know what they're coming in on, and then we can watch the levels decrease and make sure they're doing okay. There's people that don't even realize they're on fentanyl. They think they're taking other things. So, it's a popular drug because, yes, it is cheap, but it's also highly addictive. So it's not just mentally, it is also physically addictive. Like cocaine is mentally addictive, but physically, you can pretty much safely come down from it without massive intervention or medical detox or that sort of thing. But when you're hooked on opiates, the come down or the detox is excruciating. And so for those reasons, people do not want to come off of it because it hurts. And if they're not in a safe environment, or they don't have medications to help them come down, they don't want to be sick. So they're just going to keep perpetuating the use.
So nowadays, oddly enough, I'm finding myself read two audibles that are quite interesting and relevant to this conversation. One is a guy that I used to watch when I was younger on Jersey Shore, Mike the Situation. Apparently, he's an opiate addict. And Matthew Perry, which you most probably know from Friends, Canadian dude that gained worldwide fame. Both struggle with painkillers, that are prescribed by doctors. And yeah, that was a huge case in the US with Purdue Pharma being prosecuted. I talked with their former PR agency leader the other day on the pod, and it was quite interesting. What do you have to say about like these legal medicines that are being abused over the nation and the effect that it has on someone?
I think it's a terrible issue. I mean, there's so many people that come into my program. They didn't start out, well, nobody starts out as a drug addict, or at least very few. They had an accident, they had an injury, they had chronic pain, they had something that precipitated the surgery, whatever it is, and they were given the medications, and they became addicted. Hopefully, like some doctors, don't kind of cut them off, but I've also seen that work in respect too. Like they're still in pain, but the doctor won't give them medication. Now they go into the streets to get the medication because they're either having symptoms of withdrawal or they're having pain, but they're used to medicating to solve their problems. And so it is physically and psychologically not good. And yeah, I get that the pharmaceutical industry was, made responsible several years ago for the oxycodone, but they just reframe it and call it something else. I mean, what they paid in fees, what they've, came out of pocket is a fraction compared to the profits that they made. So for them, it's like, okay, that's fine. I'll pay your 10 million, but I just made 80, 90, 100. That's fine. It's a reasonable risk they're willing to take.
So Matthew Perry died a year ago, overdosed on I believe it was ketamine and a combo of a bunch of other drugs. I think he drowned actually from that use in his bathtub. And he's a lifelong addict. He went into 50 recoveries, um, had psychotherapy from the age of 18 through his whole life. He died at like 53. What do you have to say to someone like him that says there is no cure?
I would say there is. That is a big problem, is a lot of people give up hope because they know only one way. The AA modality is so prominent that a lot of people have tried that, they failed, and they're like, so sobriety isn't for me because the only thing out there doesn't work. But there is so many other ways, but there's not always easy access. Like even for us to try to put our names out there to be like, hey, we're an alternative, you're competing against, publicly traded companies and money. And believe it or not, drug rehab is like in the top 5 search terms. So it's so competitive to try to even get out there and say, hey, there's other ways. There is hope. There is something else that you can try or do. It's a very competitive and tough field for the little guys to get their names out there.
In the case of Matthew, did he just convince himself? Did his demons always get the better of him? Is just like repetition of constantly failing to tame your demons?
I don't know. I don't know what his personal reasons were. I know a lot of people, again, they turn to drugs and alcohol because it becomes a solution to whatever problem they're having. And so a lot of people will continue that because they don't want to confront or handle or change what they're doing. Or again, they don't know how. It becomes a very painful physical, mental, spiritual process to not be on it. And so it's a very quick solution to do that to alleviate whatever's happening in their lives.
Yeah, just part of their identity. It's like I'm a rebel, that shit never worked for me, and I'm just gonna do drugs, write a book about spending 350K on a jet to go back and forth to get my drugs and not being able to get them. It's like a story, it's like a character that he's playing because that was his job as well, being an actor, right? So um field sometimes actors they're shells. They just move from shell to shell and they never really find themselves. So yeah, it's a complex topic for sure. And ironically, like ketamine is used therapeutically nowadays, and that's what like got him in the end. One of my favorite rappers as well, Mac Miller. He had cat, he had fentanyl finding his system. I studied the other day the club of the 27s. Forgot like who
Mm-hmm.
was in there. I think Jim Morrison, The Doors, and the Rolling Stones, and
Janis
Janet
Joplin, Jimi
Joplin. Yeah,
Hendrix. Yep.
yeah. Like what happened
Amy
to
Winehouse.
yeah,
Mm.
what happened to these folks? Like could have they gone out of it, or just are they just tortured souls that didn't stand a chance against life?
Possibly. I do know like artists very much struggle, like you said, when they're high, it becomes part of their identity. And then when I mean, I would never want to be famous for anything because then people know them as that person. And so then when they try to clean up, they're like, oh, you're boring. You're this, you're that. They probably get a lot of evaluation of, you're not you. What's wrong with you? And it's like, well, the me was high. Now I'm trying to do the right thing. And it's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know who you are, but I want that guy back. So I think it's probably very difficult for them to bust out of that because of they're such under scrutiny and public eye and a persona, and they have to live up to this certain thing that's probably very difficult for them unless they're willing to totally own their story, maybe bring people along as part of the process, and then deal with whatever public scrutiny comes from them not being the person that people grew to love and know. I would hate that life. That's just
Yeah,
that is a whole nother level.
yeah. And I had a podcast today with like a sex tech founder, and we talked about a tool called the Handy, which is like basically a tool that jacks you off for guys. And I was like, this shit is dangerous. Do you have people coming in for sex addiction?
No, I mean, it may be as a side effect from drugs and alcohol, but not as a primary concern for us to handle. We're not necessarily equipped for that. We have community living, guys and girls. We can't have anybody that can't control themselves in that type of environment. Now,
right?
I would love to someday, utilize the technology that we've created with Elevate and use that in specialty areas like just sex addiction, eating disorders. We are fully confident that we know like our modality could be tweaked a little bit and used in any of those and give maximum gains. But mixing like the populations would probably not be the best. Like vets, like I would love to have a center that just specialized with vets, which would require more intensive like therapy than what we do, but I think we could utilize the same stuff to help those people as well.
And am I wrong in saying that the sex addiction is less life-threatening than drugs and alcohol?
I would assume so, unless they're into like the choking thing, in which, they could one big orgasm that could be dead. So I don't know. But for the most part, I mean, I would assume it's not quite as dangerous, but who knows? I mean, people get into shit, and then the more they get into it, the more they need to satiate themselves. And I think that could end up in some dangerous territory for sure.
I'm not sure about that choking thing. Haven't heard of it, but
Mhm.
I can identify, well, not me, but I can identify the trend of trying to get too high, whether it is by the chemicals that are released once you have that orgasm, whether it is choking yourself unconscious. So it seems that the human has a need to get high. Um, Last week I spoke with the CEO, and he does quarterly uh, psychedelics or medicinas retreat, like with ayahuasca and so forth. I did shrooms slash psilocybin 4 days ago. I'd like to do it quarterly because it's really insightful. So it seems we have that, not that need, but that fascination to get in high. But this is like being in a different place. You don't get high for the feeling, that you get high for the experience and what you can bring with yourself. So how fine is the line between like doing dope just to feel good or just because you need it, and doing medicine such as ayahuasca, psilocybin to get insights?
Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope. I mean, if you're someone who's never had a problem with addiction, then I think, doing mushrooms or ayahuasca with a practitioner. Like, I don't think people should just go out and let me just do it recreationally and hope for the best, because I think that could be dangerous as well. But if you're there with a practitioner who understands, can get you through it, I think there is some deep, dark, like amazing work that could be done of stuff that's under the surface that people may or may not ever find without it. However, when you're dealing with addicts, and they get that sort of that feeling, now all of a sudden they want to go not quarterly, let me go every week. That was great. Let me do more. And so when there's someone with an addictive type personality, it's a very slippery slope. And I would never recommend that as a therapy because I don't know that they could control it.
Yeah, the analogy with addicts is like a hole to fill. Um, how can we fill that hole? Is it with psychotherapy? Is it with like healthier habit? How can they fill that hole and like have it scarred and scale from there?
Yeah. And so that's what I teach in my program. I think you have to, as a human being, we have to be operating at our best in all areas of our life. So physical, there's got to be some working out. You've got to do something to help your body. And that also includes eating well, because if you're eating like crap, you're going to feel like crap. And so when an addict feels like crap, guess what they want to do? Go take drugs to feel better. So eating and exercise is paramount. I would also say personal development. Like I've gotten really big into not just meditation, but breathing meditations this year with the breath. There's so much power in the breath. There's even breath exercises that you can do that release natural DMT, things like that with long breath holds, where it almost simulates that high feeling, but it's really just you're high on your own breath. And so I think that's an amazing tool that people can use, and it grounds you into your body, into the present, into the now. I also think, like education, like podcasts, like learning, like those stories, like read Matthew Perry's story, David Goggins, like any of these things that can inspire you or keep you learning mentally. And then emotionally, I think there's got to be an outlet, whether that's, working with someone. Like I have a mentor. Most of the high achieving entrepreneurs I know, we all still have people that we go to. Even though we're helping others, we still need an outlet for ourselves as well. So I think if you were as a human being to focus on all four of those areas and make sure that you're excelling in all of those, that's the cure.
Goggins is a sage over time. I feel that like a bunch of self-help people, they've explored a bunch of facets of the mind, but very few people have imposed massive pain on themselves. I think that pain is wisdom. I think that pain scales. What do you have to say about pain and finding wisdom in it?
I agree. I mean, I'm a huge fan of creating adversity for yourself that's uncomfortable, because I think if we don't self-impose it, life will. So like for example, like I do a cold plunge. I hate it. I hate the cold so much, but for me, I know it's good for me physically, but it's also very good for me mentally, because it creates that pain and almost like that overcoming every single time I do it. So I do believe there's a lot of value there. And I believe that, when we become comfortable, we become complacent. And so it's important to continue to challenge ourselves, which can be pain, whether it's in the gym, it's running too far, it's the cold plunge, like whatever it is, we got to be creating this adversity so that there's growth.
Are there good addictions, like addiction to sport, to money, to breath?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a CrossFitter, so the running joke with CrossFitters is like it's like a replacement drug. So I think there's a tremendous benefit in that. I'd much rather somebody be addicted to CrossFit than heroin.
Right. The podcast, you've had tons of self-help experts on there. Like, what has been some of the greatest insights you've got?
Oh man, I just had a lady on Monday, and we were talking about she was a sufferer of chronic pain, and after 30 years of being on medication her whole life for this injury, she finally found the place that took her off of it, and so she's been on a path of helping others as well. And she utilizes it's called generational healing, where you're like not just healing yourselves, like quantumly, you're healing behind you and in front of you. So there's some fascinating, like different kinds of therapies like that. Like I said, the equine therapy. I know a lot of mental mindset people who are, big about the routine, the visualization, the, wheel of life, like you name it. I've had people on there, and I find value in all of it, because there's no one size fits all. So a lot of people, it sounds different coming from over here, even though it's the same thing they heard here, but they resonate with that. So I think the more that you can expose yourself to, you can find the thing that works for you.
Think humans, they tell themselves stories, like, oh, I've been injured for 30 years and so forth. I think the insight I just got from listening to you is that you can tell yourself a new story, right? Even
Mhm.
if it's not true, you can tell yourself a beautiful story that will propel you in the future, just like you can tell yourself a negative story that will define your life for the next 30 years.
100%. And that's why like I'm a fan of our modality, because we don't allow the victim mentality. Like this happened to me, poor me. The more we feel sorry for ourselves, or we're the victim of our circumstances, the less causative we are and the worse we feel. So if you can find your accountability, responsibility for creating whatever it is in your life, and then just reframing it like, yeah, that sucked, but what I got out of that was blah. Or if that didn't happen, this would have happened. So I think so much of it, like you just said, is just reframing, same stuff's going to happen to us, but how are we perceiving it? Is it happening to us, or are we somehow co-creating what is happening, which then makes us feel a little bit more powerful of like, okay, well, if I created that situation, what can I create to get out of it?
Love that. Where can people find out more about you, Angie?
I have a website, angiemanson.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. My rehab is elevaterehab.org. Any and all those things. My podcast, Going Rogue with Angie Manson. You name it.